Okay, so the time is here. So hello everybody. Welcome to this Baines Simmons webinar, one of a number of webinars that we're running at the moment around safety subjects, just to keep things ticking over really whilst the pandemic actually subsides. It's just too connected about safety world. So thanks for joining us. You can see myself, Bob Simmons, on the screen. Hello to those of you that I know and those of you who I'm meeting for the first time here. And we've also got John Elkin, who is one of our lead consultants around continuing airworthiness in particular, and will be your host today. I'm going through the subjects. So the subject for today then, getting back in. We had a brainstorm about this, and we were thinking some of the issues that the industry is facing as the large parked aircraft either re-enter service or start to that they've got. And clearly there are some safety issues around that. And what we've started to see from some of our customers is that they are experiencing some surprises. So what we thought we would do is to actually just have a discussion between myself, John, and yourselves, and we'll go through how that works in a moment, just to really start thinking about how can we manage some of those back in the air safely. So, okay, so first slide then, please, John. Okay, so a quick introduction. As you'll have seen there, and as it says at the bottom, this webinar. So if there's anything that you're particularly sensitive about, then please make an assessment whether you're happy to share that or not. Ask of everybody is to really have treat with respect both within the actual webinar itself and also afterwards as well, and really accept people's comments and ideas and questions as really contributing to the overall securing of safe aviation. So please just treat it with respect and take it with the value with which it's offered, hopefully. Mute your microphones if you're not speaking, and we'll go through again how we'll do that now. So please ask questions as we go through, share your experiences as relevant and ideas. We can all learn from each other, as it says there. And the raise hand facility is the one that we would like to do if you want to actually speak or come back with a comment. If you have a specific question, then please use the chat option or the question option on your control panel, and then we can have a look at those as we're going through and bring them in at the right time. So just raise your hand if you've got a comment and put in a question through the chat option if you'd like to do it that way. So if you have any audio problems, then please dial in via the phone using the instructions on the joining email. We've got a third member of the team who's hidden, Tertia, and if you send a message, then she'll deal with you direct to try and resolve any technical issues that you have. But hopefully we're all up and running and it's going to go ahead. So, okay, so next slide then, please, John. So here's what we're going to cover today. We're hoping to cover all of these, so it's going to be fairly fast moving. Just going to have a look at initially the unreliability that you can probably expect when we re-enter service. I mean, yes, we'll be following manufacturers' recommendations, and this ties in with the second bullet point really. But in our experience and the industry's experience, there will be some surprises that actually come up, and reliability will have been impacted because of the aircraft not being used for some time, or being used in a slightly different way, or just parked. Third subject, we're going to talk about the CAMO and the 145 and the way in which they engage the expectation versus reality. I think this is the point at which the CAMO can really step up to the mark and really own the overall airworthiness of the aircraft on behalf of the operator or of the owners. And we're just going to talk about that relationship between the two and how really the CAMO can really contribute to getting things going again and dealing with things as they arise. Competence of staff, of course, there are competence requirements in the regulations, in your procedures, which have all been approved. But really going beyond that, we're going to talk about some of the softer issues that may be experienced when you start to get back to some level of normality. And I think it will be a different normality, as a lot of people are saying, as we can see with the downsizing of the industry, the route structure very slowly opening up, the move towards cargo being shifted in a different way. It's going to be very different. So we need to be really responsive to that. And that really ties into the planning aspect of really thinking about how we get things right first time when it is all so different. Now, the final one then, if we got time, we'll just talk about the social distancing and the practicalities of how maintenance can be done with social distancing. Now, I think I can probably guess that some of you are saying, well, actually, we're already working at the moment. And from what I've seen, there's been a little bit of a relaxation amongst the wider population, let alone those people that have continued to work during the lockdown. But you know, there could be another wave. There could be some further issues there. So we probably just talk about some of the safety considerations about working with distance between people, and that's be very interesting what your experiences are and how you're coping with that in reality. So that's what we're going to cover. Again, we're going to keep it fairly fast moving. So that we try and cover all of those. And again, please just throw in your ideas and questions as we go along. Great. Okay. Next question then, please, John. So this is where I hand over to John. John, if you want to lead on this one, then we'll get started on the technical side.
Smashing. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining. And like Bob said, please share your experience with us. Ask the questions that are really pertinent to you, because hopefully we can all learn from those and help each other out. So I think it's pretty common knowledge or understanding across aviation that the aeroplanes that haven't been used tend to be a little bit more problematic when you start to bring them back into service again, for a variety of reasons. And I think that most of us, you know, across the industry have been looking at this as a potential issue, hazard, however you choose to look at it. So first off, before we get too far into it, I'd like to do a quick poll for you all, just to see where you are with your thinking, and maybe we can steer some conversations around what comes up. So you should now have on your screen the poll coming up, and if you could complete that for us, that would be really useful. You know, some interesting results coming in. It's, I tend to like what I'm seeing as well. That's
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think you know, before we share those results, John, as the last few people come into that, then yeah, it's great to see that people are really thinking about their operational plans and the risk assessments. And I think the key here is to be really eyes wide open about what's going on, and really applying sort of brainstorming with groups of people that have got experience and knowledge. And sometimes people will come up with a really wacky idea of something that might happen, and actually that might just be the surprise that's about to hit you. So it's great to see that people are thinking that way, and hopefully there is a lot of brainstorming that's actually going on around that. Interested to look again at the role of the CAMO that I mentioned earlier on. Do you want to talk about that one? We've got a 24-hour CAMO. Is quite a popular one that's coming on at the moment.
It is, yeah, that seems to be working quite well, or something thought about quite well. And I think that's absolutely key, isn't it? It is to actually, once the CAMO has decided what maintenance you do want to happen to bring your aircraft back into service, it's how you're going to manage that. You know, that's the key thing, and how you're going to keep on top of airworthiness. And you know, again, you know, the CAMO tasks, the 145. Are you thinking, you know, including the human factors piece? You know, people have been away from the job, perhaps they've been furloughed or working in other areas for a while. A lack of familiarity, that this kind of thing, all those factors that generally are wallpaper to us. We see every day, but tend not to recognise. I think they are going to start to stand out more as we start to unpark aircraft, if that's the right term. And
yeah, absolutely. Do you want to share the results on that then, John? Let's just have a look and see.
I think we're
Because
pretty much
everybody's on tenterhooks about the result here, and see what we got. So there we go. So 62% went there for a review of operational plans and risk assessments. What I'd say about that is, I think when you're doing those reviews, sometimes people can do reviews and they're fantastic on paper, but actually the way to get the biggest value and benefit out of that is to really brainstorm with the right people involved. And often in the airworthiness world we can forget about those ground handlers that are going to be coping with the aircraft as they're really coming up to speed and operating in a different way potentially, and also things like look at talking to the pilots and the cabin crew about what their thoughts and concerns are, because they've got something to add here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be a collective effort, and the boys and girls who are kind of at the coalface, working on the aircraft, working with the aircraft, are going to be the management and the CAMO's eyes and ears, and providing the feedback. And actually, they should know what's hindering them from doing the job, or actually what they can do quite comfortably, and be able to feed that back to you as well. So we're almost talking about a reporting system again, aren't we?
Yeah. It was interesting about the shakedown flights, and John and I had a conversation on this, whether it should be a maintenance check flight, which of course in some sectors of the industry, particularly with helicopters, is much more routine. But certainly if you start to talk about check flights, then you're in the realms of permit to fly, because you're potentially flying outside of the operational instructions, maybe if you're asking people to function a different system. So I've heard it used many times in the past, where actually the term shakedown flight, so actually you're just going out and you're doing an operational flight without doing anything that's outside of the normal ops manual or flight manual procedures, just to function those systems. But what I'd say about that is to really run that through your risk management process, to think about some of the risks about flying in a different way. Be a little bit sensitive about which pilots you're actually going to use to do that, if you're going to do that. And maybe you've got a positioning flight that you need to do. I know some operators, there's a lot of aircraft that are parked at, for example, in the UK, we've got down at Southend a lot of aircraft, and a lot in South Wales parked up at the moment. They're going to need to be ferried back to the main bases to get back into the operation. So maybe we're taking advantage of that flight, but just think about any additional risks that may come out as a result, really.
Yeah, I think that's key. Is we're trying to reduce risk, but by perhaps introducing a shakedown flight, or in my last role as a CAM, we used to call them good behaviour flights, which mainly talking about the aircrew, obviously. But it's actually, are we going to make it worse? Are we really clear about what we want the crew to do? What actions do we want them to take, and actually how do we want that reported as well? What information do we want back? We need to be very, very prescriptive around that, I think. And
so clearly, so clearly these five, sorry John, these five mitigations, if you like, for the unreliability that could be accepted. And that first answer, 15% of people said they're not going to take any additional actions. If the processes are agile and you've got the organization that can actually respond and really detect any early signs of reliability issues, then of course that's absolutely fine. And if you're applying a risk-based thinking in terms of really projecting out on what might happen, then of course that's absolutely fine, and it was absolutely fine to rely on those systems. But I would encourage you to think outside of the box a little bit, because I think there are some surprises out there. So John, just to sort of complete this subject a little bit further, really. So what sort of typical problems would you be expecting to see as an aircraft comes out of a parking period? What sort of reliabilities have you experienced, or would you expect in the systems?
Yeah, based on my own experience, both as the guy turning the spanners, and actually then moving up through management to CAM roles, the one that really is obvious are leaks. Systems which normally work dynamically have been left for a long time. Main gear, flying controls, anything that's hydraulically actuated. As soon as you start to move those seals, that they may recover perfectly. They may not recover at all. They may actually start to leak. Statically they've been fine. As soon as you apply pressure and some movement, they start to exhibit some signs of leakage, which may be within a limit. But then we're starting looking at how much do we use the MEL to manage these faults, and actually how much should we be taking some more permanent action before we end up with a tech log, an ADD list that's as long as your arm, and an aircraft that's really probably has some compromised airworthiness as a result.
Yeah.
Fuel systems are always one that's bitten me as well. We've not exercised the valves and rest of the components in the fuel system, so we've come to transfer fuel, and actually we've ended up dumping fuel, which has been extremely embarrassing. So again, some sort of check around that perhaps. So I guess good camoing. Camo should know their aircraft, know the individual aircraft, but actually know the type as well, and have some bit of data. Or perhaps globally there is data that you can share, and you can start to focus on what areas do I really need to be assured are serviceable, and then perhaps what areas can be the second order effects. Well, I'd like to have a check, but maybe not right now. We can perhaps push that out a bit longer. Another stuff that really might need looking at would be emergency systems. I would really I know that simple things in theory, escape slides, that they've not perhaps been serviced, not been overhauled, the doors haven't been worked. Are they going to work when you need them to? Same with ram air turbine systems. Great, it may deploy, but have the seals dried out in that system, and as soon as it starts to generate hydraulic pressure, all it does is pump your oil overboard rather than actually give you the system you need.
And I think that this is really where you nearly need to look at the aircraft and think, it's been parked maybe in the same direction for 3 months. So the sun has been beating down on one side of the aircraft for 3 months. So you'd expect actually maybe the door seals would have taken a bit more of a hammering through the sun and the temperature, and not being exercised in that time. Maybe the oleo seals, and it might be that there's rain that has actually kept some of the gear clean, like your nose gear, but actually your main gear on one side might have been less susceptible to other elements of the environment and weather that may have done it good actually. So yeah, I would say walk around the aircraft and really think about what could have happened, because it's been sat still for so long. So okay.
Right. I think a good point to move on to our next bullet, really, Bob, which is actually talking about the OEM parking maintenance schemes and whether that's been adequate now. So following on from that, looking at what we've just been discussing about is what do we need to do to recover the aircraft from parking, is it how should CAMOs in particular be thinking now? I mean, was the OEMs and the manufacturers parking maintenance plan, did it consider long-term parking during a global pandemic with perhaps loss of skills as well around the staff? What do you think you're doing here?
Well, I think, in my experience, what I've seen in the past is that, yes, you can follow the manufacturer's recommendations, but that's based on a whole bunch of assumptions and a whole bunch of, if you like, preconceptions about conditions and the way in which other aspects of the system will have been implemented to protect the system. So, for example, if you look at effective blanking, I think it's an obvious one for most people, is that you've got a set of blanks and they're there for a reason. So pitot-static, engine intakes, APU exhausts, all the rest of that sort of stuff. But actually, there's an assumption that those blanks have actually been in place, and hopefully organizations have been checking those on an ongoing basis. But I remember accidents in the past where, there have been some spurious pitot-static or some instrumentation indications early on in the service. You've obviously had that, and it's ended up that insects have actually penetrated the pitot heads and gone and blocked the pitot-static system. And you say, well, is it reasonable that every aircraft would undergo a pitot-static test? That's certainly one way you could do it, but the other way might be to really consider, was the blanking effective? You know, was it always on there? What are your records telling you? What are the people telling you that were looking after the aircraft whilst they were in care and maintenance, if you like? So you know, to really sum this up, what I would say is, yes, you will have had to have complied with the manufacturer's recommendations for parking of aircraft, but actually it comes back to that point I was making just now, is to actually stand by the aircraft and have a look at it and really think about the environment and what has happened. And hopefully you've got records and you proactively thought about moving the aircraft, about parking it in a different direction. Might not have been possible at some stage, but think, yeah, if the sun has been beating down on the port side of the aircraft for all that time and the starboard hasn't, it's likely the two sides are going to be different. Yeah, and think about your environment. I mean, if there's a lot, the two airfields that I mentioned earlier on with Cardiff, Wales, and with Southend, not too far from the sea. I mean, Southend is pretty sunny, but actually you've got a prevailing wind there that actually takes the air off the sea there, and you could end up there with some issues of, you know, salt, and you needn't necessarily see massive deposits of salt on there, but it could have had an impact. So it's worth having a look at that, and just being sort of eyes wide open and thinking outside of the box about what might have happened to your aircraft in the time that you've had it parked. We'd be interested if anybody's got any comments or have been actually applying any processes to mitigate this sort of issue. We haven't had any questions or hands raised as yet, so just a reminder, please do chip in if you've got something to add here. And I know that some organisations have actually been doing some shakedown flights of their aircraft, and obviously they looked at the cost benefit of that, and you know, decided that it was worth doing, and that might be a wise investment actually. But I'm sure that some organisations, with the money pressures that are under at the moment, particularly, probably chose not to do it. So it's really a luxury to have been able to do that. Actually.
Potentially a key factor, and we're almost launching into a human factors lesson again, but yeah, people are going to want the aircraft in the air earning money. That's what, you know, operators want. So if we're going to sit here and say, yeah, well, actually the minimum parking requirement was this, but we are also going to you know, bring in these extra tests, it's going to be sometimes, I think, quite a hard sell to get that across to the owner or the operator of that aircraft, and to say, do you know what, here's you know, the long-term value of doing that. It's not having a sort of unscheduled grounding of an aircraft somewhere inconvenient. Let's try and get ahead of the game here and now. And yes, it's going to take a bit longer. Yes, we might need a bit more time, you know, because of skill fade, and you know, the workforce, you know, if it's largely contractor, could have, you know, come and gone. You can have completely, well, at least 50% different people working for you as well. It's still trying to get up to speed with that company.
Yeah, so absolutely.
I think a robust approach from the CAMO was probably required there, and actually pushback from the 145 if need be, and collaboration really with 145. You know, so
yeah.
so that all these issues are understood and actually managed really well.
Yeah, and I think it's really that, you know, the CAMO really is the, you know, the arbiter for continuing airworthiness on the aircraft, has that chance to go along and have their eyes wide open and think about wider airworthiness issues, and not just maintenance programs or maintenance standards or, you know, the availability of spares or whatever, but to step back and really think about what could have happened to that aircraft at the time. And I think for those of you that are lucky enough to enjoy authority audits and oversight, then I'm sure at times you've thought, how on earth did they come along and find that? You know, we would never have found that. Well, I would argue, yes, you can. They're just technically professional people that have an open mind and a clear understanding of airworthiness. And you can internally, particularly the CAMO, stand by the aircraft and really think and really look and listen to the aircraft, because it will tell you. It will tell you. Okay.
And that is the camo skill. Know your aircraft, isn't it? That's really it. So
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, I think talking of camos and stuff, that's leading us on nicely to this next piece, isn't it? Is that camo and 145 communication piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about planning and competency and how the camo should really look at this, but how should they be looking at when we're getting back into this, and we think that yes, there has been some maintenance that's been going on, but actually you're not looking at the night shifts to carry on, and the intensive planning and management and control of the routine, periodic high frequency checks that come out. How should camos be thinking about this, John? What do you think?
Well, I think it's what do I think? What do I think? Camos should be thinking about the scope of the work they want done first. Yeah. Okay. So there's going to be the OEM maintenance program that we've discussed the likelihood that it would be best practice to introduce some more checks. Maybe almost I would suggest perhaps look at a mini airworthiness review or an airworthiness review. Most camos, if you have the approval, you have a process for that already, so you can piggyback onto it. But not only looking at the condition of the aircraft, and I see we've got an interesting question coming on that, which we'll cover in a minute. But what else was due to happen? What else has been updated, in terms of the maintenance program or the maintenance planning documents, SBs that have come out? What are applicable, to you? What would be useful for you to embody, perhaps? They're not mandatory, are they? Certainly ADs, though. Has anything come out that you've been missed? Or you have missed? Again, I don't know everybody's situation, but some camos, have been working remotely. Communication perhaps has not been as slick as it could have been. Maybe some staff have been let go, with some staff been on furlough. Maybe somebody's working really hard trying to cover a lot of bases, just to keep the camo afloat whilst we go through this slough of activity. So I think again it's a risk assessment, really, that there is no other way to look at it, and it's where your management system might come in to help you out if you're already there and thereabouts. I think most organisations are to some degree. You need to start looking at these new risks. Okay, we've been operating on a skeleton workforce, or we haven't perhaps been paying as much attention to certain aircraft in our fleet as those that we've been using for a slightly different role, moving cargo. So how are you going to be sure? First thing, how are you going to be sure that everything that needs to be done to make that aircraft airworthy, because that's the camos say, isn't it? How are you going to capture all that? How could you evidence that if you were asked to do so? Those awkward days when the authority turn up and knock on your door.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good time to bring in Colin's asked a great question there. So his question, is it an issue where plastic aircraft have been sitting for a long time in countries like the UAE, where the potential degradation of aircraft structure under intense sunlight could be a longer term issue? Thoughts? Yeah, it's a really good point, Colin. And certainly sometimes when you go into Dubai or Abu Dhabi or whatever, and you see all these composite aircraft that are sat out there just in normal, without actually flying out of there every now and then, or certainly being parked inside a hangar potentially for a little while, you think, what about it? So my thoughts are that, I think if you went to the type certificate holder and you say, are there any issues with the aircraft being out there, they would talk about the paint scheme, they would talk about the certification standards, they would talk about actually all of the certification process, which allows for the environment in which it works. But actually it's been different, because the aircraft haven't been belting up to 29,000 feet and back a couple of times a day, and actually, do we really understand the long-term impact of that sort of material sitting for that time? And I think, again, this is where CAMOs, where maintenance organizations can really think about this and, have a look at the state of the paint scheme, which is largely going to control that, and then, have a look inside. And that needs to be controlled, and it needs to be done in a controlled manner. And of course, it may well be worth talking to the manufacturer and say, you know, this aircraft has sat outside for all this time in the sun. You know, what are your recommendations in terms of things that we should consider or things that we should do? So yeah, it could be something that it's unsafe to just assume that the certification is going to be sufficient. You got anything else to add on that, John, at all?
I've sort of got first-hand experience of this, and I would, for a while, I worked with Airbus on the A400M program, which is a military aircraft, but it is, you know, just another big slab of composite material, really, you know, slightly different shape to other aircraft. And we were having a lot of discussions to and from with some real experts, you know, within the composite department about the colour scheme for that aircraft, and what, you know, how it absorb heat and how it react to that heat, you know, and thinking about, you know, the typical kind of operations in the Middle East, etc., that we were likely to get involved in, and that was we as the collective kind of customer base, if you like. So that was a real factor, and what came out was probably Airbus were very confident that the design would withstand, you know, prolonged exposure to you know, high intensity sunlight, I suppose, is the thing. But where we started to unpick the issue, and I think where you might need to exercise some caution, Colin, and everybody else is in that situation, is repairs and damage to that structure. You know, just like where it would be perhaps, you know, water ingress into a crack or a bit of delammer in composite will cause, you know, further damage. Disbonds, debonds, do not react well to being exposed to sunlight for a long time. Apparently, no first-hand experience of just what I've told by the experts, that can accelerate the process. And you know, unless you start to either get, as Bob said, some indication on the surface that there is a problem there, then really it could be a hidden fault. So I perhaps, you know, look at your aircraft history. Has it had repairs? Has it had damage? You know, maybe those are the areas that you might want to go and look at first, just to get yourself some visual assurance. You know, maybe a detailed inspection in that area, but certainly talk to the type certificate holder. I would suggest. So, you know, just give me some assurance that we're in a comfortable space here.
Okay. Okay, right, good stuff. Do you want to move on then, John? Let's move on to the next subject, please.
This is taking us to our second poll, actually, Bob, isn't it? So
yes, indeed, yeah. So really, I mean, competence of staff is well covered within the regulations. You know, ultimately, it's the organisation's responsibility to ensure the competence of its staff, regardless of what they're doing within any area of airworthiness, actually. Easy to say, but again, it's written around the understanding that people will be continuing to work or to work under a system that is consistent and predictable. But of course, that's not the situation at the moment. There's a lot that has actually changed, and you will have approved procedures that you will have to comply with, and there'll be refresher training for human factors, and there'll be continuation training for certifying staff, etc., safety training coming up for people as well. But you know, you really need to think that was put together on the assumption that people would be continuing to work and that they would be seeing safety reports, that actually they'd have access to notice boards, that actually there would be toolbox talks if that's something that you actually do. There's a whole bunch of things that go on which keep people up to speed and not just the training. So we're going to talk about here something a little bit more outside the normal regulatory driven one. So if you just want to put the poll up then, John, then good. So talk about the risks associated with habits and norms, and you think, good heavens, can we really admit to the fact that within our industry we still have individuals with habits and we still have groups of people that have norms? Surely not, I hear you scream. Yes, I'm sure they will have all been captured and they will have all been put into procedures and captured in a formal way. But I would question that. And I think this is a time to be really honest and to really think about whether there are any risks, good or bad, actually, associated with norms in particular. So just have a look, see what you think about this.
well, that's interesting. Yeah, that's encouraging actually to see as well. It probably means the audience don't know what we're talking about, but it's but yeah, can you guess what it is? Yeah.
So what I'm thinking here is that in the normal day-to-day environment, the real world of getting on with maintenance, with all of the commercial pressures that you've actually got, with all of the differences, and particularly now, if you think about your people, for those of you that are in an industry setting, there's a massive amount of noise being around just how tight the finances are. A lot of organisations have sadly had to let a lot of good people go. And it's a different nervousness that's out there actually about the security of aviation, civil aviation as a whole. So there is some pressure there, which means that people will react in a different way. So if you just want to share those results then, John, let's have a look at those. So really thinking about it, norms are out there, and there will be things that people will have been doing routinely that will have been keeping the operation going. Yeah, it's just human behavior, and it might be for a short term until somebody does pluck up the courage to report it and get it controlled. And it's probably less of an issue now. But how do you know? How do you as individuals know what the organization is doing there? And looking at 63% of you that think that the error and hazard reporting system is being used, I would say, yeah, actually, if you've got a really good open culture that is one that is open to learning and really dealing with some of these issues that make it difficult for people to do things in the way that they're supposed to, then fine. But what I would say is, it's different now, and it's probably worth reminding people and going out there and talking to them, saying, is anything creeping in that's different? Have we forgotten some of those norms that we had that were going on, that were keeping us going previously? And whilst I wouldn't encourage you to have a training program to refresh people's understanding of norms, and I see that some people, 15% of you have said that that is a good idea, I would say, actually, if you use that at the same time as really thinking about how you can control it and manage it as an organization, then actually fine. Yeah. And the last thing you want to do is to say to people, no, stop, go back to the book. And they say, you can't comply with the book. What are we going to do? We've got the pressure to keep operating, and we haven't got the tools, or we haven't got the time, or whatever. You say, right, get it reported. Get the organization to own that and to actually respond to it in a different way. So thanks for your responses there. It's good to see that. And yeah, issuing reminders is fine. I think do it in a human way though. Try to really, walk the floor and talk to people and really encourage them to open up about what the real world is like. Yeah, capture the norms and how they're being under control. Yeah, great to see that 5% of you have made some good progress on that. So yeah, just be mindful that actually norms, they can creep in as situations change, and there might be some new norms that have crept in as a result of coming out of the COVID epidemic. So if you look at shift times and shift manning, for instance, likely to be different and to be a bit tighter in terms of the manpower and a bit uncertain at the moment, less predictable. So again, this is where you nearly need to stand back and really think about what has changed in the situation that may well have introduced new norms, or maybe the starting of habits to actually come out there. So yeah, great.
I think, Bob, the risk around norms as well in today and looking forward is, in a perfect world we wouldn't have norms, but actually you can have some good norms, and Qantas did a bit of work about 10 years ago on capturing those and actually bringing them back into the box of standards, which was exciting at the time. However, I think the norms that we had a year ago, perhaps with some established stuff where if somebody had found a workaround, if we're going to talk about this kind of non-compliance, but they knew why they'd found it, they understood it, they were probably, we employ intelligent people, that they'd worked out why they couldn't follow the manual, why they didn't have the tooling, and they'll tell me and maybe give me an explanation. But now that's gone away perhaps, and so people are coming in where somebody's expecting you to just get on with it. Fred could do it in January, why can't you do it now? And not understanding the whole process that developed that norm, and I nearly said not complying with the norm, which is just a terrible thing to say, isn't it? But
Yes.
It's a complete lack of understanding, and it turns into this is a workaround that's potentially safe to this is just what we do here, and that's a very different thing. And I think that starts to introduce another level of threat to safety of individuals, airworthiness of the aircraft, etc. So I think it's something to be cautious of is don't expect your people just to pick up where they left off, or don't expect new people to pick up where the old people left off. That's
Yeah, good.
and
We've got a great question coming there
yeah.
from Jabran. Thanks for that, Jabran. In this whole process, what is the role of the National Aviation Authority? Yeah, really good one. So being ex-UK Civil Aviation Authority myself, I thought about this long and hard, and I think if the authority goes in as a hard policeman that is really expecting 100% compliance all the time, then you could say, well, that is the role, but actually, is that going to encourage organizations to be open and to deal with these human issues in particular in an upfront and open and positive way? Because actually, if you drive things underground by being too strict and too sterile in terms of the way in which you apply the rules, then I think that that's inappropriate, and you can't be it would be counterproductive actually, and you can't be entirely ignorant of the situation that actually, with COVID-19 and the huge impact that it's had on our industry, there is that situation where actually the regulatory authority, the role that it can play is to actually go along there and to say, what are you doing in terms of thinking about what is different, encouraging organizations to really apply their hazard identification, their risk mitigation, and then the verification of its effectiveness, to really apply it in a practical way that is really good for the organization as a whole. So as much as anything, I think the role of the regulator here is of course, it remains to be satisfied that the organization is compliant and safe. Of course, that's just the minimum standard. But actually to encourage organizations to think a little bit out of the box themselves. And yes, it does have to be controlled, and it does have to be fit in with the organization's processes and procedures where they're established. But actually asking organizations to really think about, well, what are the different risks? There was an accident to the A320 when flights started to open up. I can't remember where it was. Was it India or somewhere, Indonesia? I can't remember. Sorry, I'm tired, so I didn't get that. But that was, I think, the day or the day after operations restarted in that part of the world. And I thought, was there something there? Were there some telltale signs that were there that said that this, in combination with other environmental issues, other pressures, other situations, maybe a lack of competency or recency, resulted in that accident or contributed to that accident? So it may be completely unrelated, and I don't know, I haven't seen anything on the investigation as yet, but it makes you think, what could be different? And I think the key for all of this, and it really comes back to the core subject of competence, is to say, engage with your people from a senior management level and downwards into the line management. Get out there and start talking to people about what they're thinking, what they're concerned, what their thoughts are around what might have happened to the aircraft, or what might be happening with the revised operation or the reduced manpower and things like that. Because they've got the horsepower, as John said earlier on. They've probably got all of the answers. You just need to stimulate them to think in a different way. And if the regulator can actually do that in terms of contributing to the overall standard of aviation safety and encouraging organizations to do something fairly structured in capturing issues and putting mitigations in place, it may well be that we stop a lot of people from dying, and that's what this is all about.
Yeah, but bottom line, and it sounds like we're catastrophizing, but that's what we're about. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, just to add to that, Jabran, that the role of the authority has not changed. But I think, as Bob says, the way they approach, audit, approvals, oversight, I think has to be different. In the approach and the attitude, if they're just going to come in and say yes, no, and you're compliant and non-compliant, that's absolutely no help to anybody really. But I think what, from my experience, I've only in my professional career dealt with two authorities, the Belgians and the UK. But I've found if I've been able to demonstrate that I'm aware of the issue and I have a plan to manage that, a corrective action plan, for want of a better phrase, they've looked on that in a fairly favourable light. I might have said, well, actually, can you bring that forward a bit, or we're not too happy with that bit, can you tighten that up? But that's worked quite well. If they've come in and said, what about this, and you go, I don't know anything about that, then the conversations haven't been as comfortable with them, I don't think. So
yeah, and I mean they probably need to think about interim mitigations as well, and it may well be that you identified an issue. Having a plan isn't quite enough. To do a risk assessment and to really understand, well, what's the impact of this particular issue on safety, and coming up with some mitigations that may well be temporary, they may well be fairly informal. It doesn't matter, just so long as you do something to actually lower the risk to an acceptable level. And then you're right, John, and then it comes into the plan and saying, well, let's manage that through. Let's look for clear ownership on that. Is there a vision about what it can actually deliver into the organization in terms of safety, as well as actually commercial success? So there's a whole heap of perspectives there that need to be considered at this time from both the regulators and the organization's perspective. But yeah, engage your humans. You'll probably realize that that's a pet subject of mine.
My line to when I was either a 145 manager or a CAMO, my line was, I'm here to support you, to my certifiers, to my team, not the other way around. So you tell me what's right and wrong. I don't know how to service an A330 particularly, but I can help you do it right. That was my kind of role, and my attitude to it. And I'd like to think that it's not unique to me. I'm sure it's not unique to me because I learned it from somebody else. But that's the kind of thing we're looking for, and this is a really good opportunity, and I know we're sitting here in our ivory tower with no pressure for commercial around us, but all those things that have been wrong, have been frustrating you, we've always done it this way. Well, actually now maybe is a time to address those and give your team the chance to actually make it easier to do it better, make it easier to be safer. So it's not all bad news. I think it's opportunity as well, but we do need some control and some caution around it, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, John, I think you're absolutely right. It is an opportunity. And I think particularly, if the volume of work, although you might have less people, the volume of work might be better, you can start to influence people's thinking a little bit and say, yes, we need to think in a different way. We need to work in a different way. But whilst we're doing it, that might be mainly driven by either regulatory compliance or by performance safety standards, and think about doing it in a smart way and really trying to benefit the business. Because if you make it easy for people to work in a safe way, you can bet your sweet bottom dollar that you're making it easy for them to work in an efficient way, and that's going to add to the commercial success of the organization as well. And if you can bring those things together, that people see that a safety initiative can have massive commercial benefits at the same time, then it just flows a lot easier. And if you can link that to regulatory compliance as the baseline as well, then you end up with a workforce that actually sees regulatory compliance as really securing the future of their organization and their personal employment. Yeah, it's a win-win situation if you get it right.
I mean, the perfect illustration of that point, Bob, before we move on very quickly, has been Qantas. Really liking the press about Qantas, but a colleague of mine worked for them for a long time. About 10, maybe just over 10 years ago now, they were aware that their 145 was full of norms, or their 145s are full of norms. So they said to their people, right, okay, tell us what you're doing, and we'll try and make that approved data effectively and bring you back into the box of standards. And with that, we maintain our record that we are the safest airline in the world.
Yeah, and that was absolutely.
Absolutely. That was the driver behind it. It was to maintain that reputation that we'll get business because we're safe. We've never lost an aircraft. And it's worked. And it's like everything else. It was, you know, slowly. You know, first people sort of testing the water, but it seems to be business as usual for them now. And I think other airlines have adopted that as well. But
Okay, John, let's move on. A couple more subjects, and I see the clock is ticking down here. Doesn't time fly when you're enjoying yourself, eh? All right. So really, this is coming back to this is coming back to the CAMO question again, and really I want to get a little bit closer to the maintenance side. I wish I'd worked in a hangar that looked that clean and that quiet. Yeah, it's certainly a different environment. So so you know, what aspects of maintenance do you consider as presenting the highest risk in the current situation then, John? One, in terms of it actually restarting and people getting used to maintenance again, and two, in terms of the aircraft having been parked for a while.
Well, I think this, that it's chicken and egg there, isn't it? That we're going to go around cyclically with this. And I think the first thing is if you look at you know, the regulatory term recency for individuals, there I think, you know, I know there are a lot of people who haven't touched an aircraft for a while now. So that 6 months recency has started to be eroded already, or the minimum of 6 months recency to remain, you know, considered competent and remain a certifier are starting. Then how are we going to recover that? And actually not just not looking at aeroplanes, you know, not being around them every day. You could argue, you know, it's had a lot of press coverage and Twitter coverage now. The accident at Aberdeen last week, I think it was, one aircraft, another one. That was probably, and I don't want to prejudge because that's not what we're about, an oversight. What would have normally happened is routine when people were doing it day in, day out. Somebody forgot one thing, you know, maybe didn't follow the procedure, didn't have it in front of them, but one thing was forgotten, and it led to one aircraft rolling into another one. So some of this is actually going to be, how can you be sure that when you bring somebody back into your organization or a new person into your organization, that they're going to pick up where they left off or be able to pick up where you need it? What extra checks maybe do you want to put in there? You know, and we go back to, you know, the assurance of competence, you know, in under Part 145, the AMC there does suggest some ways you could do that, you know, some on-the-job checks, knowledge tests, sort of product sampling. There are lots of ways we could do this, or maybe just an increased level of supervision, just to be sure that, yeah, we know this person can do these tasks confidently, and then perhaps by evolution from that, you know, they can do that, they can do this as well. What I think might present a big change is you may see faults now that you haven't seen before or haven't seen for a long time. You know, where you have you know, hydraulic components that are failing, or leaks that, you know what leaks are like on aircraft. You know, the leak appears in one place, but actually its source is usually miles away, and it's the component the aircraft is built around. So are people's skills up to the standards you need to provide really good and accurate diagnosis of the fault, and, you know, troubleshooting, and then actually what about the course of action they're going to take to resolve it as well? How reliable are they, you know, in unfamiliar territory, really, for a lot of people, I think. So I think we need to look very carefully, you know, and again, it's going to be a 145 management issue, but also the CAMO is going to have a real interest in this, and you know, really pay close attention to what your 15 is telling you when they start saying, oh, we've got this unusual fault. What do you want us to do about it? We think, well, actually, okay, what can you do about it? What skill sets have you got? How long do you need to resolve that? Now, maybe that's a question to ask. Do you actually need to go a little bit of training before you change the flat motor? You know, it might be something that simple, but yeah, lack of recency, eroded competency, you know, maybe there's a bit of that, you could call it, together with unfamiliar tasks, new tasks, perhaps complex tasks. The two are not a healthy mix, not a comfortable mix, and again, I think it's relying on supervision and management, and you empowering, you know, as Bob was saying, empowering your workers, the boys and girls who are throwing spanners at aeroplanes day in, day out, to make sure they can report back and say, put their hand up and say, I'm not comfortable with this. I need a bit more time, or I don't understand this fault. Can somebody help me out? Can I get a
Yeah,
tech services or something to help me? I think you
yeah,
really
yeah.
make sure that that's available to your team. Um,
Yeah, and I've seen, I've thought, what they're doing in the air ops world with a load of pilots that are obviously laid off at the moment, haven't flown for some time. It's actually, there's been some quite imaginative ways of keeping the guys current in terms of thinking, I remember that this happened to me going into Tenerife many years ago. This is what has happened. Let's have a little bit of an online, in some cases, a game around it, actually, or a quiz around it, just to get people's heads into that space and to get them visualizing the cockpit and the indications, And I was thinking, well, how could you do that in the maintenance environment? You could say, well, it's a little bit late now because actually we're ramping up. I would say absolutely not. Now is the chance that you can really quickly learn from the early experiences that you've got. And you may well still have some capacity within your maintenance team, and you've probably still got some people that are on furlough that may well have some ability to actually do some development for themselves, which I believe is certainly legal within the UK. If they're furthering themselves, then they're able to spend that time, so long as they're not producing something for the organisation. And your good people will be engaged with the organisation and keen to actually come back and hit the ground running. And I would encourage you just to be a little bit imaginative about maybe sharing some of the past experiences that have come up that might be relevant now, or to actually really capture some of those early experiences that might be related to the aircraft having been parked or people being a little bit rusty, to actually capture those and to do something with them remotely if you can, to engage people. So yeah,
yeah,
okay.
I think
Just noticing the time there. We're just sorry, John. We're just getting
that's
down. I
right.
was going
Well,
to say let's
we've
just have a quick.
just had a couple of points from Marcus come in,
Oh yeah.
and I agree that skill fade, however you want to call it, loss of competency, and time pressure may be more of a concern. It's probably going to take you longer to do a job, and of course the operator wants his airplane in the sky earning money, doesn't he? And so planning more time, as Marcus is kind of put in his question there, I think is key, and it's going to be taking some moral courage and having a robust discussion sometimes. Or if you're an effective CAMO performing well within your organization, then maybe you can build that in from the get-go.
Mm, mm,
But yeah,
mm.
so our last point then, Bob, I think really is where we're going to, isn't it? Is
Right.
social,
Yeah.
there is going to be a new way of working for us. How do you see that shaping up what we can do? And we've just talked about supervision and training and
Mm, mm.
all those other, skill development. This is potentially going to affect how we deliver that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking back to my time as an inspector on aircraft, and these sort of situations where you've got people that are working together. And I like this picture because kind of the task lends itself at the moment at this stage to having people that are distanced. But of course, that's not always the case. And I think that you should think about, what are the assumptions that we have that during normal times, normal periods, then you can point out and you can say, that's where the problem is, or this is where the leak is, or what was it that you actually replaced, and get that physical interaction of people that need to be in close proximity. Now, perception is that people are starting to get a little bit relaxed about the overall situation, and are probably starting to back off on the social distancing, which I think is unwise. I think we do still have to take precautions as far as possible. Otherwise, we could see a second spike, and that would be disastrous if it's as big as the first one. So what I'm thinking about is actually step back and talk to your people again. There we go again, and really think about, well, what is different now? If these people were going to keep a minimum of a meter away from each other in the UK with a face mask on from next week, then it still makes communication and the passing of information around maintenance, duplicate inspections and things like that a bit more challenging. So I would say be a bit thoughtful about what might have been impacted by the fact that people cannot physically be so close together. Longer pointers, little sticky tags to actually indicate the part that's been disturbed. Yeah, but at the same time, be a bit careful that you don't introduce additional risks. Okay, right, John, we're almost out of time, I'm afraid. So,
there is a good question from Ben. I don't know if we've got time to answer it because it's opening a. But how are others here managing the adjustment and return to shift work, which I think is a really important question, very pertinent. A lot of guys have been on furlough, concerned about limitations of human performance, especially around planning safety-related tasks. Yeah, absolutely, a brilliant question. I think we might have touched on some of those issues, Ben, but perhaps not in the depth that you're looking for there. Very quickly, I don't know if anybody out there has got any bright ideas, or if they want to share them with Bob and I, we can perhaps transmit them as well through the Baines Simmons media.
Yeah, great question, Ben. I really like that, and I think that again, it's really thinking about the human and perhaps some of those physiological limitations that people have around human performance limitations, and really thinking about that. What I would suggest very briefly, and what I've seen one particular organisation is really increasing its focus on encouraging people to report, even if it's a transient situation where people are just experiencing something in their first week back at work that others may well experience that could then lead to something nasty happening. If you can capture it quickly and raise awareness or do something to mitigate that, then that's probably the best you can do. So, okay. I'm sorry, we have to stop there. Stickler tried to arrive on time as we do in the UK. So thanks very much for participating. It was great to see so many people turn up for this. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please feel free to just give us a call if you want to discuss anything that we've mentioned. Yeah, and particularly if you want some help, then let us know, of course. But it's a conversation. So if you'd like to stay in touch and you'd just like to actually continue the conversation through those email addresses, then it'd be great to hear from you. So as the two Ronnies actually say, and I hope that some of you would understand that, it's thank you very much for your participation, and it's a goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Hopefully some of you understood that. Thanks a lot, guys. See you on the next one.
Thanks for the question.
Cheers. Bye-bye.